So, Jonathan, recently the Obama administration has come out with an agreement with Iran. What's your opinion on this whole agreement with Iran?
Well, I'll address this on, I think, a few fronts. Uh, I think if you are concerned, if anybody's concerned about an eventual nuclear Iran, in other words, an Iran that's eventually going to be capable of developing a nuclear weapon, I don't think there's reason to believe or to feel secure with this kind of agreement. The main reason is because it doesn't completely verify Iranian compliance with the agreement. Now, what do I mean? Well, first of all, the intention, of course, of the agreement is that Iran will reduce its stockpile of uranium and as well as the number of its centrifuges. Um, and this process has been agreed to be maintained for 15 years, at least in the agreement. Just 15 years for now. If we were to assume that Iran would abide by all of the requirements of the agreement for its declared facilities, such as the Natanz facility and the Fordow facility, if we were to assume that they'd abide by these restrictions, all of them, which include reducing the number of its centrifuges to just 6,104, with only about 5,060 to be enriched uranium, to allow for enriched uranium, if we were to assume, that still doesn't guarantee full Iranian compliance, because there's a bunch of facilities out there that are not declared, and we don't know about them. And that kind of process, for example, this is just one major example that I've come across in the agreement that is really problematic. The International Atomic Energy Agency has to request from Iran permission to monitor these undeclared facilities and to inspect to see if full compliance is coming about. They have to ask Iran, and we have to at least trust that hopefully the IAEA will be doing its job in this agreement. But if they ask Iran, then Iran has to either comply, or if it doesn't want to comply, it has to. Iran can propose its own alternative and its own method for the IAEA to inspect these undeclared facilities. Now, the IAEA and Iran have about 14 days to agree to come to an agreement over how the IAEA can inspect these undeclared facilities. If they do not come to an agreement, then it goes to the P5+1 powers, again those 6 countries that Iran negotiated with, to come up with an agreement at least within a week. That's already 21 days. Then, once they're completed with an agreement, let's say by a week, Iran has an extra 3 days to prepare for these inspections. So that means that Iran would have 24 days at most, at maximum, to prepare for potential IAEA inspection of any of their undeclared facilities. So I'm personally not convinced that this agreement will fully prevent Iran from eventually obtaining a nuclear weapon. That said, I understand the rational desire for Iran to want a nuclear weapon. It's next to India and Pakistan, which have nuclear weapons. China's not far away. Israel supposedly has nuclear weapons.
Nuclear ambiguity.
Ambiguity, correct? I'm not. I understand that. That at the same time, I don't think that legitimizes Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon, especially considering that Iran has signed on to the non-proliferation treaty,
The non-nuclear proliferation act.
the NPT, and Israel, on the other hand, is not signed on to it. So Israel has no international legal obligation to abide by these restrictions. I'm not convinced, and I think there's every reason to be concerned, if you are concerned about a nuclear Iran, that Iran can eventually obtain a nuclear weapon. And again, the other mission was just to prevent their breakout time from 2 to 3 months to just a year. So I'm not convinced.
Well, I think one of the biggest issues is that you're dealing with a country who is a state-sponsored terrorism. Ever since 1979, the Iranians had kidnapped, the embassy, the U.S. embassy employees, and kept them for a whole year. And they kept them hostage. And not only that, in 1981, Iran backed terrorists to blow up the U.S. embassy in Beirut, and also the Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983. They've kidnapped Americans in the past. They've funded Hezbollah, who has gone to war with Israel. They have threatened Israel several times to wipe it off the map. They chant death to America in the streets.
They also support Hamas.
They also support Hamas as well. They chant death to America and Israel in the streets. They hate the Western world. They want Shia Islam to spread throughout the whole Middle East and the world eventually. They are not to be trusted. Even in 1993, they blew up the Argentinian Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires. And in doing so, recently, Alberto Nissim, who was the attorney who found the connection between Iran and the president, was found dead in his apartment in mysterious circumstances that many people believe is actually foul play. And it's hard to believe it's not foul play. So whether Iran will go by the guidelines, I think so. But I think most probably what will happen is that Iran will lie and cheat,
Mm-hmm.
and the community won't even know about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have a question for you regarding a lot of people that are asking, like, why not negotiate with Iran? Well, a lot of people will say, hey, we negotiated with the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union had so many nuclear weapons, and they were clearly anti-American because they were communist. They were a communist regime, at least a communist declared regime, and they were competing with America in the Cold War, and yet the United States was involved in negotiations with them in the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1980s when the Soviet Union was eventually moving away from communism. There's people. Why not? I guess the devil's advocate in this is why not negotiate with Iran when America negotiated with other enemies of the United States beforehand?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that in the case of the Soviet Union, we were constantly at war with them. We were constantly blowing each other up through proxy wars. Vietnam was a proxy war for the Soviets. They wanted to bankrupt America in the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. wanted to bankrupt the Soviet in the Afghan
Mm-hmm.
War, which they succeeded,
Mm-hmm.
and they were able to achieve that. And also was pretty much Reagan's hardline politics in terms of saying that they're gonna make Star Wars defense, and we're gonna not take anything from the Soviet Union. And I think that is really what brought about the collapse of the Union. It wasn't any of these talks.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the times that we've dealt with tyrannical countries in talks have never ended up well. During Chamberlain in the 1930s, when Germany invaded the Sudetenland, Chamberlain appeased Hitler and said, okay, just up to here.
Mm-hmm.
Hitler took that as a response that we are not going to act no matter what he does or where he is going to invade next, which eventually led into World War II.
Mm-hmm.
During the Clinton administration, you had the Clintons every time there was a bombing in Somalia, a bombing every time that Al Qaeda attacked us in general. The response of America was airstrikes or to just withdraw.
Mm-hmm.
When we lost a lot of troops in Somalia, the response of the Clinton administration was to get out of Somalia and withdraw troops.
And do you think that was wrong?
I think that was wrong because it led up to 9/11.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Also,
that's I'm sure that obviously that's a legitimate conclusion to make. Other people also make different conclusions other than that. But again, I'd like to say yes. We negotiations in the past failed. I think Germany is a good example of that. And a more recent example is North Korea. When the world tried to negotiate with North Korea, Bill Clinton, there's that famous video in the 1995 when Bill Clinton said we succeeded in what we did with North Korea, and lo and behold, North Korea becomes a nuclear weapons power. But again, like, there were times when it did succeed, again, in some ways, on some levels, the negotiations with the Soviet Union.
Soviet Union, what do you mean?
Like, eventually the Soviet Union started to, in the 1980s, started to adopt certain reforms.
That was because of the collapse of their economy and the Afghanistan war that bankrupted them.
So then would you be okay with negotiating with Iran in a position of strength? Let's say that that's a position that Rand Paul advocates, for example. That Rand Paul says, who's running for president on the Republican in the Republican Party, he is running for president in 2016. He said that what Obama did wrong was not necessarily that he negotiated with Iran, but that he didn't negotiate from a position of strength, and that's what was missing. Do you agree with that?
I don't think that no matter where you would get onto, I don't think Iran would bend on anything.
Okay.
Because they are very ideologically driven.
Mm-hmm.
They believe in the spread of Shia Islam,
Mm-hmm.
and they want conquest. They want to take over the world. They are in no interest. They don't care what you have to say.
So you don't believe in any good negotiations?
I don't believe in any negotiations with Iran. And I think that the result of this negotiation was that the Obama administration just wanted to make a deal.
Mm-hmm.
And because Iran wouldn't budge on anything, so they eventually kept taking down the terms until we got to the deal that we have now.
Well, here's what I would say. I would say that it would have been great, at least from Israel's perspective, if Iran did not get the agreement that it got. It would have been great, and it probably would have been great for most of the Arab countries in the region who are also concerned about a nuclear Iran. It would be great because it's in our interest that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon, because clearly they want our country to not exist. They don't, and we don't want them to get nuclear weapons. We don't want a country who wants your regime to be eliminated to get nuclear weapons. I guess what we have to address now is what does this mean for Israel? Where do we go from here? That now that other countries have negotiated with Iran and have made an agreement that's probably not in Israel's best interests, what should Israel do? And you wanted to say something?
Well, I think you know where this is going, and the way that I see it is that Israel has to, first of all, build up its arms, get ready to bomb Iran, and get ready for a regional confrontation. I think it's just the way that it's been building up. And obviously, you know, in terms of covert ops, which Israel's probably going to continue to do, which is kill its nuclear scientists and send the viruses.
Well, again, the Mossad has never confirmed, of course, that they have been involved in these plots.
Yeah, they've never said that they've been involved in these plots, but it's hard to say that they haven't.
Yeah.
I mean, who else wants Iranian nuclear scientists?
Well, the Saudis.
Saudi could have also been involved in that, but I mean, look, like this is one of the only things that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and if worse comes to worse, we have to be ready to attack Iran, without worrying about what the U.S. or the international community will say about it. We have to be prepared to fight 100%.
Well, on the last thing that you just said, I think it's this is where I would be coming from. I think that more than just prepare for a potential strike on Iran, and I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing or not to do right now. I don't. I think we should keep monitoring on the situation and keep, just be as informed as possible about what kind of a threat Iran could pose at any given time. That's for sure. And we should be concerned about this. But I think more so than that, there's something that was suggested by, written, that Moshe Feiglin, who is the former member of Knesset in the Likud party, in the last Knesset session, he wrote something on his website. He commented a little bit about the results of this deal, and the title of his post was "The Erroneous Premise Comes Home to Roost." And here, Moshe Feiglin pretty much criticizes the traditional Israeli reliance on countries like the United States and Britain to provide for its national security. Just a short tidbit from what he wrote. He says, but the catastrophic point is that even now, after the nuclear deal has been finalized, nobody's asking the basic, obvious questions. Where did we go wrong? How did we get into this mess? Why did we enter into a rearguard war? Why didn't we employ Begin's Iraq nuclear reactor bombing tactics a decade ago, when operationally and diplomatically it would have been much easier? After all, for 60 years, we have been dragging every visiting VIP to the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem to explain to them why we need a state. So how is it that when a hostile state, Iran in this case, boldly declares that it is planning a new Auschwitz and time and again threatens to destroy Israel, we turn once again to the US and British Air Forces, expecting them to bomb the railroad tracks for us? And he continues and says, for years I have been warning of the catastrophic consequences of trusting others with Israel's security. And he goes on about what he's done in Likud faction meetings, meeting with all of these different people. And I think he says it right on point there, that I think the main problem here is that we expect the United States to always make its foreign policy moves completely in line with our national interest. And that's just, I think, personally, that's a foolish approach to international relations. We should not expect for any country, no matter how friendly they are with us, we should not expect for any country to fully be in line with our national security needs. And I think that this is a perfect opportunity. This is a perfect opportunity for us to just digest this reality, to digest this reality that only Israel can ensure its own national security needs, and we cannot ask another country permission to do something necessary for national security. That means if the need comes for Israel to ever bomb Iran, which I hope never has to happen. I really hope it never has to happen. But if it does, we shouldn't ask for any country for permission to do so. We should be doing whatever is best for our national security. And I think that is something that this is a perfect opportunity to digest this, because clearly this agreement doesn't seem to be in the best interest of Israel. And we shouldn't expect that that's always going to be the case, even from your closest friends in the international community. And I want to know if you concur with me on that.
I totally concur with you. I believe that every single country has their own interests, and they'll have their own problems. The U.S. wants to destroy ISIS, and I think one of the reasons why they're pushing for this agreement is that they can use Iran to help fight ISIS. Mm-hmm. Even though, in return, Iran would be able to give money with the billions of dollars of assets that would unfreeze for them, they would give to Hezbollah, Hamas, which would in turn fight against Israel. But the U.S. is looking at the interest of defeating ISIS. And I think this is the reason why they actually even push for this agreement.
So that means that at this moment in time, this is where U.S. interests and Israeli interests can clash. And lo and behold, we have this kind of outcome. And I guess we agree that Israel needs to finally fully understand that only Israel can provide for its own national security. And I think that's the lesson we take from this.